So I read what you made me read.
I'm sorry.
So I read George Eliot for the first time. Her book, Daniel Deronda.
You've got a massive brick in your hand there.
I do. It's about 700 pages.
God.
This plus the 400 pages of stats notes. Yeah, I've done a lot of reading this month. I kind of want a break.
Good. So next month you're going to target to read as many books as possible.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, yeah, I'll have one book for sure, and then maybe like 3 other books that are like novella styles. But it's all gonna be from the same guy, so we'll see.
Cool.
Right. So Daniel Deronda. How much detail do you want?
I want you to read the preface, the introductory note first of all. So after we recorded last month, we had a look at this, and I laughed for quite a long time.
Yes. Daniel Deronda is George Eliot's last novel, published in 8 independent parts between 1874 to 76, at a time when she was generally acknowledged as the greatest living English novelist.
That's not true.
In by far her most ambitious work, Eliot uses experimental form and unusual content to break new ground for the English novel. After the enormous success of its predecessor, Middlemarch, Daniel Deronda was greeted with reservations which still linger.
I particularly love that the reservations still linger.
We have been quoting that part for a while now.
It's fantastic, and I have reservations. For any new listeners, we've covered a few George Eliots, maybe 3. I've not really, I hope not 4. God, I haven't really liked any of them, and I just didn't want to read this one and gave it to you.
Yeah, basically. You're always like, it's always last on the list. And I'm like, well, I guess I could maybe try one. And then looked at it and was not happy that I ended up with it.
Yeah, I mean, Middlemarch is very boring. Imagine a whole town that are obsessed with who the local doctor is, and then nothing happens for 800 pages. The Mill on the Floss, just some people being a family, and then I never figured out what the Mill or the Floss even was. And then at one point PJ used to laugh, the girl's just sitting on the floor hugging her father's knee while they both just sit in sadness all evening. So this is my idea of George Eliot. Scenes from clerical life. I'm so bored by the title I can't remember the book. But you said this wasn't bad.
I got through the first 2 of the 8 books within 2 days, I think.
Okay.
Then got busy. But yeah, I've overall enjoyed this book. Now, okay, 700 pages, you're bound to have some parts that can be cut. This does say complete and unabridged on the cover.
Yeah, shouldn't have been abridged.
I think it should have been abridged. Yeah, I think in general, though, there's not a ton you can cut. I think you could cut 100 pages.
Okay.
But I think that's mostly here and there. So there's going to be parts where it's just going over comparisons and some philosophy that I just did not care about. Like, there's one character in this, I'm like, right, he's an important character to the story, but going over his philosophy about, Jewish nationalism and all that, like, it doesn't matter to me. And they're debating the intricacies of it between a group of these different Jewish people. And it's like, all right, I also have no idea what you're talking about for a lot of it. So
yeah,
that definitely happens.
That is the Dostoevsky method. If you read Brothers Karamazov, which I only read part 1 because I couldn't get to part 2, it was a separate book and I just couldn't bring myself to read it. At times, it's just okay, the next 80 pages are going to be a discussion of religious details in specific detail, and it's I don't care. What are the characters doing?
Yeah, and that does happen throughout this. As you would expect, it is still a George Eliot. But there are some things that I really liked from this. I'll go ahead and read through some of the passages that I enjoyed. I messaged you a few of these already. Talking about Grandcourt, who's a character here, he never chose to kick any animal because the act of kicking is a compromising attitude, and a gentleman's dogs should be kicked for him. That one definitely made me laugh. We also have here some of the best way to talk down to someone. You find no difficulty in tolerating him. Then you have a respect for a political platitudinarian, and insensible as an ox to everything he can't turn into political capital. You think his monumental obtuseness suited to the dignity of the English gentleman.
I like that one.
It is absolutely fantastic. Yes.
So maybe after writing her entire oeuvre, she eventually discovered wit.
There was a bit of that, yes.
I'm going to be honest with you. I still have reservations.
One last one. What should we all do without the calendar when we want to put off a disagreeable duty? The admirable arrangements of the solar system by which our time is measured always supplies us with a term before which it is hardly worthwhile to set about anything we are disinclined to.
Okay.
I'm like, all right, yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's like, let's just keep putting things off. Our calendar's made up, time's made up, and like.
So, what did you think of the writing style compared to like Dickens and Thackeray and others of that time period?
I don't find any of them to be necessarily too difficult to get into. There are times where I will just get to the end of a paragraph and be like, I have no idea what you said, but it's just more of that philosophy. So I just keep reading.
So, what's it about?
Yeah, okay. So the story... Do we have time? There's a
long book.
It's a long book with a lot happening. So the first part of the back here says, Gwendolyn Harleth, George Eliot's most remarkable heroine, marries for money and power rather than love, but finds marriage a trap and her husband's sadistic use of power constricting. She gets married at the halfway point.
Okay.
Also, she's not technically the main character. But she is...
Daniel the main character?
Supposedly. So for the first 350 pages, I would say 2/3 of this is Gwen's story. But
okay.
I think she's a very interesting female character. Basically, because she's not someone who's your classic sticking to the mold, she isn't sure about getting married. And her mother's worried about some of her mental health at times, but her mother doesn't know how to deal with this. Basically, what she'll do is she'll just say, like, well, I don't know how to exactly help you, but marriage will probably help. And she doesn't know how to turn anything other than what is traditional.
Okay.
But for Gwendolyn, she's not really sure. She's never fallen in love with anyone. Her cousin, at one point, confesses his love. She's like, I've never been interested in any man.
I always have that problem with my cousins. I'm never interested.
yeah, usually. So that's a huge part of her character there. She eventually has some witty retorts with this guy, Grandcourt. He is very high up in society, has a lot of money, and takes an interest in her. But she's like, I guess he's not the worst man. Like, okay. He's the only one she can find somewhat bearable.
Okay.
But she doesn't realize... So she had met Daniel Deronda at some point while she was gambling, has some witty retorts with him as well. He ends up being the only one that she actually ever loves.
Okay, of course.
Yeah. Her husband likes her because she's different. She's not going to give like the same answers as any other woman. That's just like, so what did you do last week? Oh, I did some sewing. Like,
yeah.
He's not interested in that. But it's for the wrong reason.
That.
Yes. Did you forget the kicking dog part?
Yes.
Basically, for him, his whole point of this is he loves to have control over people. So he wants her, it seems to me at least, he wants her to be this way so that he can be the one to control her.
Right, I was thinking the opposite. Like, he wants someone that's different because they're, like, a bit more full of spirit and independence.
That's what you think at first. Yeah, that's what I thought at first. But no, it is basically because he wants to be the only one who can rein her in. Which is...
is it a taming of the shrew, kind of thing?
It's that. It is. I was definitely thinking that while reading it. So it's really bad. She's not sure about marrying him and basically says no at one point. She also is told that he has kids with a different woman.
Okay.
And never got married. So that is why she's like, I'm not going to get married to him. But what happens is her family goes into a lot of debt. They don't have money, and this is where the only part where I really hate this character. Basically, she's like, well, I have to either become a teacher or a governess. I don't want to do that. And she's like, well, we have this set up for you. You can totally take this. And she says no at first. And I'm like, that really, really irks me. Like, okay, so you're just too proud to be a governess and all that. Sure.
It was lit down upon at the time,
Yeah.
I think.
She ends up talking to the music teacher that she has. He has his own sort of story, but it's not super big. And basically, he's like, you're going to struggle. You're not necessarily good enough to be, like, top of the line. You're going to be third rate, probably. He has to tell her, like, do not just give up everything and go for this. So she agrees to
Sometimes
become a
that's
governess.
good to know.
Yeah. Until Grandcourt shows up and offers to marry her, and she's like, so you'll help my mother out and give her money. Okay.
Do not marry for money.
Yeah. So she's like, she tells her mother, I'm not going to marry just for you. And she's like, I'm marrying just for you. But
Okay. So she doesn't marry Daniel.
no, she marries Grandcourt.
Why
And
is
that's
why is the book called Daniel Deronda?
I don't entirely know. So he's the most important character in the second half.
Okay.
In the first half, we get introduced to him a little bit. We find out that he's a gentleman. He was taken care of by this guy, Sir Hugo. We think that he might be like the bastard child of Sir Hugo at some point,
Okay.
but we learn a little bit later he's not. What happens is he's going around down the river, and he sees a woman about to drown herself. And, of course, stops her, helps her out, and she ends up being the sweetest person out there. She's fantastic. She also has a beautiful singing voice. She's basically just perfect. But what we find out...
marry for a beautiful singing voice.
We find out that she was wanting to kill herself because she's like, I came here after my father took me away as a child to try to find my mother and lost brother, and I haven't been able to find them, so I've given up.
Okay.
And so he takes her to his friend's family's house, where it's the mother and 3 daughters, and they immediately fall in love with her. Take her in, and her name's Myra. She ends up having everything to live for because they're so supportive, and she's an angel to them, and they love her. The only thing is that she's a Jewess, and it doesn't really cause much tension, but it's like a few times in the books, like, you should be Christian. She's like, I'm not going to do that. But I do like that. So for Daniel, he wants to help her out. He goes looking for the brother and mother. And so the brother's name is Ezra Cohen. He's like, well, I'm probably not going to find this guy's shop. He looks around, and there he finds the shop pretty much immediately. But it's not the Ezra Cohen, which we find out a little bit later.
Okay.
It's just a different Ezra Cohen. Just a
Oh,
different
instead of
Jewish
the
guy,
other
Ezra Cohen.
Because it's such a common name.
Yeah, apparently. But he has his whole family, and they're so sweet, and they get along really, really well. And he starts becoming interested in like the Jewish culture and sort of Hebrew, and they have someone there named Mordecai that almost seems like he has visions at times. It's not really talked about too much, but he's very spiritual, and this is the only character that I don't love because he does go really into like the philosophy of like what he believes, and like, I really just don't care. Can you talk to me more about like these family connections? And that's what's really interesting to me in this book. And we find out he has a lost sister. Mordecai.
Victorian books have a lot of lost relatives, more than I find in my normal day-to-day life.
So Mordecai is his middle name, and his name is Ezra Mordecai Cohen. And so Daniel has taken a liking to him. Ezra really loves Daniel and even asks him, like, are you Jewish? And for a bit, I thought Daniel was the lost brother, because we find out that he's a bastard son. And
Is it because the book is called after him and you assumed he would be important, but he wasn't?
Well, no. I'm just saying, like, I thought that he would be the lost brother for her, but that's not the connection. He does find the lost brother, and they have like the greatest bond. He, of course, has Myra meet with him, and they all are super happy. And then I know I'm skipping a ton of things because so much happens in this book. I feel like, but he gets a letter from his mother, who's a princess in Russia,
Oh my god.
a Jewish princess in Russia. He has to travel and meets her, finds out his family history, and finds out that he is Jewish.
Ah.
And she said, I did not want you to figure this out because they lead such a difficult life at times. I
Okay.
wanted to save you from that, and then also wanted to save you because your grandfather was very controlling from like what he wanted your life to be. But Daniel's like, I'm actually happy to know that I'm Jewish, like because I've been so interested in this culture, and I've never had family or anything, so now I feel like I'm part of something, which is
Okay.
really interesting.
So, two questions. The
Yeah.
first, apart from you mentioning that the one guy might be controlling of his wife, it
Yeah.
sounds like everyone else is like super nice, happy, friendly unicorn time.
To an extent, his friend Hans, which I haven't really mentioned, isn't really a nice guy, but it's mostly just because he says things that are insensitive. It's like, well, this guy's dead. You can marry her now. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's a terrible thing to say.
Okay. But I mean, it doesn't
But-
sound like there's a villain per se.
No.
Okay.
I feel like everyone has their own personal struggles of where they fit in, and that's where the conflict
Okay.
comes from. What was your second question?
My second question was, is this some kind of... Because a few times you've mentioned about the Jewish theme, and in particular this guy's happy to find out he's Jewish. Is this like a deliberate social commentary from George Eliot? Like, hey guys, we should stop being mean to Jews, basically?
It seems like I looked sort of at like Wikipedia of it, and it seems like that it was
That was intentional.
important
Okay.
for the time. Yeah, that was a really big focus. I don't think it's really in your face, and I'm happy with that because I don't want it to be in my face.
Mm.
But it's basically like these people are human. Why can we not just
Of course.
all get along? But there's a little bit more to talk about.
Okay.
Basically, Gwendolyn's out at sea with her husband. He forced her to come along, and they're out on a yacht, and then they go out on the boats after that. And we find out from Daniel's perspective, because he's also in the same city that they're in. He's like, who's in the water? That's Gwendolyn. She's alone. Why is she in the water in her dress? Her husband fell over.
Okay.
Her very controlling husband fell over into the water.
Why is she in the water?
She apparently dove after him.
Uh-huh.
I don't entirely understand why she dove after him, but she was very happy that he was dead or wanting him to die. Basically, we find out the story that basically the beam came over from the wind, knocked him off. He apparently had like a cramp, and he asked her to throw him the rope. She was basically hoping for something like that to happen. And then it's not her fault that he fell over, but she didn't give him the rope.
Ah.
She comes back crying and completely distraught about this. I'm like, I don't know. You wanted him to die.
I think that's morally okay.
That is a very interesting point to make. But then also Daniel says, but he was a good swimmer. He should have. He's always out on the boat. He probably had a cramp and would have died anyway.
Okay.
So that's very interesting.
I just like the moral
Yeah.
dilemma because, like, some people
Yeah.
would say it's okay because he wasn't good to her. I don't think that.
She thinks that she murdered him.
Okay. I don't think she murdered him because I don't think we should put moral duties on people.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be lovely to save him, but not a requirement.
Yeah. So Daniel's single. She's now a widow and tries relying on him.
Ooh la la.
But Daniel's found out that he's Jewish and can now marry Myra.
Uh-huh.
And Myra is the one he really loves.
Does Gwen end up sad and alone?
Yes, but she gets through it. She
Okay.
ends up... So it ends with his marriage. Ezra has tuberculosis throughout all of this and ends up dying on the last page. But we find that they're all with him together. Gwendolyn wrote to the wedding, like... I just have it on the last page here. So, yeah, you must not grieve anymore for me. It is better. It shall be better with me because I have known you.
Okay.
She seems to have kind of grown up throughout this. She has another story where basically she gets contacted by the previous woman who had the kids, which you probably already forgot about.
I forgot about that, but it makes sense.
But
that
she
would
gives
come
the
back.
diamonds back and a letter on it, and of course she doesn't feel comfortable now around Grand Court and has anxiety attacks. And yeah, I'm also probably forgetting a lot of other things. This book is a lot, surprisingly.
It's a big book.
Yeah,
Okay.
but more than Adam Bede's. I've been talking for how long now? 20
Yeah,
minutes?
I mean, there wasn't much that happened in some of the others, like Adam Bede, for example. Even though it was the one I liked the most, it sounds like a lot happened in this, which is good. Are we giving it a yeah?
I do think it deserves a yeah. Can I necessarily say, like, you have to read this? No. Do you have time? 700 pages, small print.
Do you have
I
to read
think
it?
it's
No.
like-
Do you have time to read it? No.
I think I calculated it's like 17 hours, 17, 18
Ooh.
hours to get through this book, nonstop reading. So, if you want to take the time, I would say go for it. If this sounds like it's something for you, obviously I've told pretty much the entire story, so you don't have to.
Okay. It's certainly a book.
For you, yes.
Okay, well, the real question, does it make you want to read more George Eliot?
It makes me interested, except for everything else I've heard about George Eliot.
Maybe
The reservations still linger, Dean.
my reservations still linger. I don't think she's terrible. I just think she's boring compared with all of her peers, basically.
I mean, there were definitely times I'm like, get on with it, but
Yeah. Like the God in Monty Python.
exactly, that's what I always quote. Yeah.